Welcome to the Baseball Nation show on SB Nation's YouTube channel. I am Grant Brisby.
I am Rob Nyer.
And we are here to talk baseball. And because it is September, there is a lot of baseball to talk about. There are three great races going on in baseball, races that are even better now than they were just a week ago. It's a little bit hard to believe. But we'll start with the AL East, where we've got three teams going at it. They're all kind of scrumming for what looks to be a division title, and then most likely the second wild card now, with the A's going nuts and pulling away. So what are you looking at in the East, and what are you seeing, and how do you think it'll shake out, Rob?
Well, it's funny, just a few days ago, I wrote about the Rays and the Orioles and the Yankees, and the Rays look like the best team in that division, but it might not matter whether I'm right or wrong about the Rays. It might not matter how good they are, because as you and I speak, the Rays and Orioles are playing, and if the Rays lose that game, they will fall 4 games behind the Orioles with just a couple of weeks to play, and it's going to be very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult for them to come back. So what I'm looking for is to see what happens Thursday afternoon in Baltimore, because if the Rays lose that game, it comes down really, I think, to the Yankees and the Orioles for the division title and the second wild card.
4 games is pretty tough to come back from at this point, especially when you're kind of playing against two teams that are beating each other's heads in, and you know, it's easy to take a game, lose a game when you're in direct head-to-head competition with each other. So 4 games would be a pretty steep mountain to climb for the Rays, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, really what it comes down to is people are going to look back at this series, especially if the Orioles wind up sweeping. They'll look back at this series as being the key moment in the season for those two teams, and they'll be right. But the underlying factor here is that the Orioles are on pace to set an all-time record for success in one-run games. They're 26-7 at this moment, which would be the record. The Rays, meanwhile, are 20-25. And that's the real difference between those two teams this year in terms of the standings anyway. The Rays have played better. They've got a better run differential by a lot. But the difference in one-run games between the two is massive.
Yeah, and you saw the one-run game on Wednesday night. You saw it in a big way just exactly how the Orioles are winning. Maybe not exactly how, but in the 9th inning, the Rays had a runner who they should have had runner on first and third, but Manny Machado got a slow chopper, made a fake throw to first, spun around and got, I believe it was Rich Thompson, in a rundown. It's just an amazing play, but it's exactly the kind of plays that the Orioles have been coming up with in the 9th inning. If it's not that, it's great bullpen work. I mean, there's always something that's allowing them to win these one-run games. You know, it might not be sustainable if we're talking for a 300-game season, but it's worked for the past 140, 150 games. So it's been fun to watch.
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, I feel bad for the Rays a little bit because they have played so well and probably are not going to make the playoffs. But the Orioles are a great story, and I think you have to pull for a team like that to do well. And it'd be a lot of fun if they could somehow finish ahead of the Yankees in the AL East. That would be the sort of the ultimate.
That would, man, I mean, who would have thought in April? I mean, obviously nobody. Anyways, we're going to move on to the NL wildcard, which is probably, I'm not going to say it's the best race in baseball. It's close, though. I mean, now that we have the Phillies into it and the Brewers into it, which last week seemed almost silly. I mean, so much had to happen. You had to have the Cardinals just kind of go into a tailspin. The Dodgers go into a little bit of a tailspin. The Pirates had to completely melt down just for the Brewers and the Phillies to get in it. But they're 3 games out. I can't believe this.
No, we say it all the time that things are incredible, or amazing, or phenomenal, and things are those things. But this one really, almost anything you can imagine pales next to it. You're right. Where 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the standings were very obvious. It was very obvious what was going to happen. It was going to be probably the Braves winning a wild card, and the Cardinals, and the Dodgers or the Giants, and the Pirates fighting for the second wild card. And to some degree, that's still happening, except the Giants don't need to worry about it anymore. But in that span, or in the last few weeks, the Cardinals and the Dodgers have lost 11 of 15, both of them in a tailspin. Pirates, even worse, have lost 16 of their last 21. At the same exact time, the Brewers have won 18 of 23. The Phillies, 18 of 24. I mean, all these things had to happen exactly right to get to wind up in this mashup. And now we do have 5 teams with legitimate shots at 1 wild card spot. And that doesn't even include the Diamondbacks, who are 4 games. They're only a game behind the Phillies. And look, chances are it's going to be one of the teams we expect, the Cardinals or the Dodgers. But anything could happen. 2-way tie, 3-way tie, 4-way tie, who knows?
Yeah, I would. When the Phillies moved 3 games back, I said, okay, I had this idea. I was going to look at their roster, and my idea for an article was going to be getting Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, and Doc Holliday back. That's going to be the reason why they're good again. I mean, you get those players back, it's an infusion of talent. It's why they were supposed to be good in the first place. That was the reason. And the more I looked at it, Howard's not doing well. Utley's he's doing pretty well, but he's not doing amazing, super all-star Chase Utley things like he was a couple of years ago. And Roy Halladay's been struggling a little bit. Not too much, but he's certainly not his old self. So when I look deeper into what the Phillies are doing, it's guys like Eric Kratz is hitting like he's Neo Johnny Bench or something. Kevin Franzen took over for Placido Polanco, and he's been going nuts. They've been getting all these random great performances. John Mayberry's on a hot streak. And, it's something you can't predict. But I think with the second wild card, you're going to be seeing a lot of stuff like this in the coming years. Just unexpected teams just popping out of nowhere in August and September.
Yeah, and at least making a run at it. And you made a great point when you wrote about the wild card. And I think it's fascinating is that all of this has happened after the Phillies and Brewers gave up. The Brewers traded arguably their best starting pitcher. The Phillies traded some guys away, Victorino, obviously, Joe Blanton. I mean, I suppose some fans might say we should have kept those guys. We'd be even better. But it's just, you just can't operate in July as if you're going to make this amazing, miraculous run and get in the hunt. You've got to plan ahead for the next season when you're that far behind, but crazy things do happen.
Yeah, and the best thing about it is that they are, playing for essentially a play-in game to the playoffs. So it's still exciting for the fans, but what they're playing for isn't like, they're not playing for the full ride. They're not playing for that full 5-game series. So it's a nice balance between still in it, still have something to root for, but they're not going to be unduly rewarded for, finishing with the 5th best record in the league. We're going to move on to the AL Central. The AL Central is a little bit of a blind spot for me because I've been so focused on the National League, the AL East. I'm always surprised to see, I'll look up and I'll see the Tigers are losing to the Royals, or a team they shouldn't be losing to. But they've kind of picked it up against the White Sox recently, and they're threatening to close the gap there. How do you see the Central shaking out?
I really like the White Sox heading into this week because they had a 2-game lead and they had 4 games at home against the Tigers. So you figure, well, they're going to at least split, maybe win 3 out of 4, push their lead to 3 games, which would make them look pretty good. So far, it hasn't worked out that way. Heading into Thursday night, they could still get a split and leave this series 2 games up, which would leave them in pretty good position. But the Tigers do have the more favorable schedule down the stretch by a little bit. So really, it seems odd to say that 1 game is very important at this point in the season with still 2 weeks to go, 2.5 really. But it does feel like a very important game Thursday night because if the Tigers do win Thursday night, tie for the division lead, and have the easier schedule, you have to like them as at least co-favorites, if not favorites. But if the White Sox exit the series with a 2-game lead, you have to like them as favorites too. Not by a lot, but it does seem like a really important game, as important as a game can be at this point in the season.
Yeah, the Tigers were supposed to be the lock of all the 6 divisions. The Tigers were the one you didn't have to think about too much. They were going to win the Central, and then you worried about how the NL East was going to shake out, how the AL East was going to shake out. But Central, who's going to compete with them? The White Sox have been great, and the Indians were there for a while, and that changed rather quickly. But now it's this death struggle for the Tigers in the Central, and when this was going on in June and July, and you had all these teams scrumming for the Central, it was easy to look at the Tigers' schedule at the end of the year, where there was just tons of Twins, tons of Royals, tons of Indians, and being able to go, okay, that's where they're going to pull ahead. That's what that's where they're going to be the Tigers we were seeing the whole season when they get that soft part of the schedule. But so far, I mean, when they've run into teams like the Royals, run into teams like the Indians recently, it hasn't been that easy for them. So I don't think you can necessarily assume that they're just going to run roughshod over the rest of the less fortunate teams in the AL Central like you once did. And that makes it a lot more interesting, which it also makes it harder to explain, why they're playing well against the White Sox. It's a real bizarre race.
Yeah, it is. And both those teams have a lot of games left against bad teams, especially the Indians and the Twins. I don't think, though, it's going to be enough for them, their schedule, for them to get into the wild card hunt. Like a month or so ago, like whoever lost the division had a shot at the wild card. That's not really true anymore. So this is for all the marbles for those two teams. If you don't win the division, you're out.
Right. We're going to kind of make the segue into Miguel Cabrera, from the Central to Cabrera, and it kind of ties into the divisional race, because if the Tigers win the Central, and if the Angels don't make the playoffs at all, both scenarios are pretty likely. I'm not going to say both in conjunction with each other is the most likely scenario, but if the Angels don't make the playoffs, the Tigers do take the AL Central, is Miguel Cabrera the MVP? Does he have a pretty good shot? This kind of reminds me of the Juan Gonzalez, Alex Rodriguez debates of yore, when Alex Rodriguez was pretty close to Mike Trout's age. It seems impossible not to give Mike Trout the MVP. So this is kind of a test of the voters. How much do they weight that getting into the playoffs factor that they generally are so fond of?
Well, I think it's a process, basically, the evolution of the voting. I think it will play a role. It could play a role if the Tigers make the playoffs, and especially if Cabrera wins a Triple Crown, which is a possibility. It's unlikely still, but it's definitely possible. He'll pick up some support. I don't think there's any question about that. I think that the voters have, this is a loaded word, but I will say they have evolved, enough of them, where there's really nothing that Cabrera can do at this point, short of, say, hitting a couple of walk-offs in the last few days of the season to put the Tigers into the playoffs. I just think that, I've seen so many mainstream writers this season referencing Mike Trout's wins above replacement, which is where he really kills Cabrera. Cabrera's hitting is right there with Trout's, really. But Trout kills him on the bases and in the field. And that leads to a much higher WAR, wins above replacement, for Trout than Cabrera. And I think that that and all the hype that Trout's gotten as well, the combination is going to make him almost unbeatable. Even if the season ended today, or when the season does actually end, I don't think the standings are going to matter as much as they would have, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think with the caveat that if Cabrera does win the Triple Crown, he wins the MVP. I don't think the evolution has been that substantial to where voters are going to overlook that. And it's not likely. Cabrera is 3 points behind Mike Trout. Batting average as of going into Thursday, he's 3 RBIs behind Josh Hamilton going into Thursday, but he's 5 home runs short. He's behind 4 different players. So that's going to be almost impossible to make up. Not almost impossible, but really, really difficult to make up those home runs to get in the Triple Crown race. But yeah, I mean, the hitting, you're right. It's almost equal. And then you've got maybe the playoff factor if the Tigers make it and the Angels don't. Okay, you've got those two set them to the side. The base running and the defense, even if there wasn't wins above replacement, how could you overlook that? How could you overlook Mike Trout stealing so many bases at such a high rate? Miguel Cabrera, not exactly the most adept defender at third. Mike Trout is the most adept defender in center field. He's amazing. So I don't think that there really is any way other than the Triple Crown, division or no division. We're going to move on to Stephen Strasburg and his shutdown. It's a very under-the-radar story that you might not have heard about. Stephen Strasburg isn't going to pitch anymore. The Nationals are heading to the playoffs. They have a chance to go to the World Series. They have a chance to win a playoff series for the first time in franchise history, I believe. But they're not going to do it without who could possibly be their best pitcher. I guess Gio Gonzalez has been their best pitcher this year. But certainly Strasburg's one of them, and he's not going to pitch anymore. So, Rob, your thoughts, good idea or bad idea?
How much time do we have?
Yes, seriously. I mean, it's a nuanced story. It's not. I think it's funny that there's so many people saying, here's my concrete opinion, and it's obviously bad, or no. It's very, very nuanced. So, what is the Rob Nair take on it?
Well, again, I mean, I really, things just keep piling. I wrote something long on this subject a couple of days ago, and just since then, a couple of other things have come up that I've seen that make me want to write about it again. The latest was Thursday morning, somebody tracked down Louis Yoakum, who the LA Times did, I believe, who performed the surgery, Tommy John surgery on Strasburg. And first of all, I've been reading various places, usually from fans, but the notion that somehow Dr. Yoakum was involved in the process whereby Strasburg was limited to 160 innings this season. And Yoakum said, no. They never even asked. They didn't ask me. They didn't talk. I haven't talked to them since the surgery, basically. And in fact, Yoakum suggested that this was completely Mike Rizzo's decision, the Nationals GM. It was basically arbitrary. He used the exact same innings cutoff, 160, for Jordan Zimmermann last year when he was coming off Tommy John surgery. So there doesn't seem to be any real data here. It's not personalized. It isn't like they said, well, here's Jordan Zimmermann's arm, here's Stephen Strasburg's arm. Let's figure out what's better for this guy and this guy. No, it seems to be a very arbitrary number, 160. And I think that's the argument that we might have is, why 160? Why not 170? Why not 180? Why not the Chris Medlin plan? I'm not saying Rizzo's wrong. I'm saying that from all appearances, he just made this up. That's all we can say, given the information that we have.
Yeah, I respect the decision to limit his innings, to want to keep him healthy, to want him to be a pillar of the franchise going forward. But it obviously could have been handled better as far as maybe starting him later in the season, maybe starting him in the bullpen, stretching him out a little bit, putting him back in the rotation so he would be available for the playoffs. An argument that I've been hearing is, well, the Nationals didn't know they were going to be in the playoffs. I don't buy that at all, because before the season started, they looked like contenders. They were getting a guy like Edwin Jackson on a one-year deal specifically because they expected to contend. And when you have that, it's hard to imagine not starting Strasburg later or doing just something different to where the only other option was, nope, he's done, not pitching in the playoffs at all. Especially because the Nationals had options. They had Chen-Ming Wang, they had John Lannon. They had kind of filler to stretch out the rotation for that early part of the season. So I respect the idea behind keeping him healthy, behind wanting him around for a long time. But the way they did it is really, really baffling, and even more so in retrospect. But it's done now. So we're not going to see Strasburg anymore, and that's kind of a shame. We're going to move from... It
is a shame, and Randy Gisardi made a good point on Grantland earlier this week when he pointed out that we've probably gone too far. Randy has been in favor of taking better care of young pitchers for a long time, but this 160 number, it was just invented. And what's next? What if this works? Is that now the new paradigm, 160 for any pitcher coming off Tommy John? What if one of these guys gets hurt? Do they go back to 140? I mean, where does it all end?
Right. I mean, you're never going to have a one-size-fits-all for every pitcher, as much as you'd like to have it, and as much as you'd like to have absolutes. You're going to have guys on one end of the spectrum where you're going to have Nolan Ryan, pitching 330 innings and throwing 200 pitches every game, which is only slight hyperbole, and pitching until he's 44, 45. And then on the other hand, you're going to have guys who just can't stay healthy for whatever reason, Rich Harden or Mark Pryor, things like that. So it's always going to be a work in progress, but it'll never be solved as much as the Nationals would like to think that they have the leg up on it. We're going to move from injuries that you can try and prevent with Stephen Strasburg and injuries that it's going to be really, really hard to prevent in Brandon McCarthy. Brandon McCarthy was hit in the head with an Eric Ibar line drive. Just a terrifying, terrifying moment. I can't even watch the video. I still haven't watched the video yet. Just a completely horrible scenario. And then after, okay, so it happens, it's horrible, you don't want to watch the video, but McCarthy walks off the field and you're kind of complacent. And then the news comes out the next day. He had emergency brain surgery, he was having hemorrhaging. I mean, just horrible, horrible, life-threatening stuff. He's better now. He's got his, he's out of the hospital. He's tweeting hilarious things like he always does. But what's it going to take to change whatever could be changed when it comes to line drives and comebackers? Is there something Major League Baseball can do?
Well, that's a really big question and a good question, and I say that because I don't have the answer, essentially. Yes, you could put some sort of a mask on the pitchers. I think they all resist that. It would be cumbersome, take a lot of getting used to. I mean, we had the same back in the 50s. Players resisted, most of them resisted wearing batting helmets. That wound up being the paradigm. And of course, you can't imagine a player batting out at home. That would seem insane. And it might be that in 20 or 30 years, it'll be like that with pitchers too. They'll all be wearing helmets, and it will seem barbaric for them to have not once worn some sort of head protection. But it is a little different for a pitcher, given the movement that he has to make. He has to turn his head to see the bases, that sort of thing. I know that people have proposed such a thing. I haven't seen anything practical yet, which isn't to say there isn't anything, but I haven't seen it. You will always have risk. There's no way to get around having risk for pitchers with the way baseball works. It might take someone getting killed to actually spur a real change. I don't know. Let's hope not. I mean, I'm not saying I'm for change. I'm just saying that if you're going to do it, that isn't why you should do it.
Right. I think something should be done, but like everyone else, I don't have the answers. I'll pass that buck to someone else. I think when I read Jeff Sullivan at Fangraphs had a piece about the injury, and one of the lines that stuck with me is that batters have this composite helmet that is used to protect their head from pitches that come in up to 100 miles per hour. Pitchers have to deal with balls coming at them even faster when they're in a position not to defend themselves, and all they have is a hat. And there probably is a way to get a little safer than just a hat. Don't know what it is, but I'm pretty sure that just a hat isn't going to cut it. Above and beyond that, a different kind of hat. I mean, I don't know, but it feels like something should be done, and I'm scared that you're right, that someone will have to get killed or seriously injured, maybe career-threatening, something completely nasty for it to change. Because we've had a broken neck, and we've had emergency brain surgery over the past year. I mean, what more could, what's it going to take to have real drastic changes?
Well, but the question again, though, is what is that drastic change going to be? I'm sure a lot of people have thought about this, try to come up with a perfect solution, and no one has. If there was something easy, it would have already been done. Fact is, hitters are really strong. Pitchers throw harder, by the way, than they used to. And what that means is the harder you throw, the harder the ball comes back at you. So the risk, I think, is higher now than it's ever been.
Well, what would you say to maybe moving the mound back to 80 feet? Just chew on that for a while. Okay. That's going to do it for the Baseball Nation show on SB Nation's YouTube channel. You can send us questions. You can send them to our Twitter account at SBN Baseball. You can also use the hashtag #BaseballShow, and we'll call through those and pick out some good questions and try and answer them. Until then, I am Grant Brisby.
I'm Rob Nyer, and we will see you next week.